Can you touch on what some of the key differences would be for a U.S. tech company as they would look at the practices in those various countries and lease terms and other things that they might need to consider?
Well, it's a long laundry list, David. I think it's always important to place the context of what US companies are used to and accustomed to here in the States. And if you look here, when you're acquiring space, typically you're dealing with a sophisticated owner. It's a transparent real estate market. There's lots of data that you can access. You can either lease space directly from the landlord on a 5 or 10 year lease, or you can actually find sublease space where another tenant has already built out the space and you can get a shorter term with a lower capital expenditure because the fit out has already been completed. When you're done with the space and you exit because you've been a success and you're growing, there's very little exit cost, and the landlord pays your broker. Now, when you go to international markets, some or all of that goes out the window, candidly. Things like ownership, if you're acquiring space in Brazil today, I mean, there's a multitude of different ownership. There's a lot of real estate ownership that is still very much held within families. So you're dealing with a variety of different levels of sophistication. And often in a lot of these buildings, it's not single ownership. You'll have individual ownership per floor of the building, which creates complications. The lease terms vary dramatically. In Brazil, for example, you may sign a 3 or a 5 year lease, but you have the ability to cancel the lease as a tenant on 3 to 6 months notice with very little penalty payment to come out, so you get tremendous flexibility. Other markets you're going to be tied in, like London, 10 or 15 years. The expense of the space, acquiring space in the heart of Mumbai is going to be a multiplier of what it might cost to acquire space in a fringe location in Paris, for example. Who pays your broker? In a lot of the international markets, the tenant actually has to pay their advisor rather than the landlord paying them. Restoration costs, or dilapidations as it's known in the UK, this is a big exit cost that a lot of times, and this is one of the mistakes that we frequently see, is US companies don't realise that at the end of the lease they have to return the space back to its original condition. And that is often referred to as a Cat A quality, which means you have to build in brand new, a new ceiling, lighting, flooring, ceilings, and some other things, which actually creates a big financial liability at the least that companies don't make the allowance for. Subleasing space, taking Brazil as an example again, because you have those very tenant favourable abilities to exit the space, there is no sublease space. So the ability to go and get that pre-created space that has the money already spent is difficult. The timing to close a deal, that varies again because of the sophistication of the landlords, and as we all know, a lot of our international markets have extensive summer vacation periods and the like. That has to be taken into consideration. And things like security deposits. Here in the States, a letter of credit is standard. Places like Ireland at the moment, understandably, the banks are a bit wary about letter of credits. In fact, they don't take them, so they like to see hard cash sitting in an escrow account, or they need a parent guarantee. So those are some of the differences. But I would also say, aside from the lease structure differences, you also have differences in the type of space. So if you're, let's say you're a social media technology company and you're in Boston or New York, you know, you're typically going for that pre-war kind of loft-type warehouse converted space. Now, if you go to Dublin and you're a Twitter or a Facebook or a Google, you know, you're going into the Docklands area, which, because of the boom that took place there, the majority of the stock there is actually going to be fairly new Class A office stock. It's not old warehouse-type buildings, but that's where those companies are clustering. If you go to London, again in the East End, it's probably going to be something more similar, a kind of pre-war warehouse building. You go somewhere like Shanghai, where the government obviously has a big influence in terms of where technology companies go. They tend to be located around the universities, which are on the fringes, which tends to be more of that sort of Silicon Valley, suburban office park type experience. So the same company, the same types of employees, but it's very different real estate from one market to the next.
Good to know, and a lot of considerations there. You know, one thing we know is that companies can't often predict how many staff they're going to have in a new country, you know, 3 or 5 years out. A lot of companies are starting small in kind of serviced office spaces. Can you just quickly touch on, you know, when a company should start thinking about making the transition from that first, you know, serviced office to maybe a more traditional leased office for their company?
So I completely agree with the statement that service office space, tends to be the preferred route into a market because, candidly, nobody knows what the headcount is going to be. And as I've mentioned, a lot of these markets, you have to make longer term commitments if you're renting traditional space. Now, of course, that comes at a premium for that flexibility. You know, Regus and Servcore are some of the more commonly known names, but there will be a number of local operators as well. So there is competition for that. But I think once you get up to about 20 to 30 people seems to be the magic number at which it then makes sense to move into a more traditional direct office lease situation because of the cost becoming prohibitive in the serviced office space. Another example here around Twitter. Their Christmas party of December 11, they had 2 people at their holiday party. By Q1 of 12, they were up to 30 people. At their holiday party this year, they had 110 people. So that's the type of growth, and therefore that's the flexibility. So ultimately, the location may change very quickly.